Parents are at their wits' end when it comes to iron deficiency. They want to help their kids. They put them on high-dose iron. They're constantly researching iron-rich foods, and they just can't seem to get their kids' iron levels up and to stay up. And it is one of the most common complaints that I get in my clinic. There is something going on, and it's my job as a nutritionist to get to the root cause of what is causing that iron deficiency. Stick with me as we dig deep into what could be at the root cause of your child's iron deficiency anemia. The question we need to be asking is, why is there not enough iron circulating or storing in my child's body? Let's unravel that question. Join me as we dig deep into these 4 factors when it comes to your child's iron deficiency problems. A quick disclaimer, this is generalized advice based on my own clinical experience, case studies, and research. We are all unique, and it is highly recommended that you take your child to your own health practitioner for an individual assessment on their health. Dietary intake. Now, believe it or not, this is actually the least common reason why people are iron deficient in my clinic. And yet it seems to be the number one thing that parents focus on when they've realized their child is iron deficient. They've been told to take a good dose of iron each day and to look for iron-rich foods to give their children. Sound familiar? Yes, poor diet can definitely be the root cause of your child's deficiency. But remember, as a child starts to become iron deficient, it can lead to things like poor appetite and fussy eating, which means they are not eating iron-rich foods all of a sudden. But may not actually be the primary cause. The children that I do see in my clinic with poor dietary intake of iron are usually those children with vegan or vegetarian-based diets. If you do have a super fussy child with sensory issues, it could definitely be at the root cause. Or perhaps the super fussiness started as a symptom of what was actually the prime cause of the iron deficiency. The chicken before the egg. If your child is iron deficient, absolutely keep getting those iron-rich foods in. However, if this hasn't resolved the issue yet, it may not be the root cause. Number 2, and this is the most common reason why children are iron deficient in my clinic: absorption issues. Your child may have issues absorbing the iron in those foods. Let's explore that. When I see chronic iron deficient kids in my clinic, the first thing that I check for is celiac disease. Celiac disease has a huge impact when it comes to absorption in our gut, particularly to those villi that line our small intestine. They are finger-like little hairs that suck up all those nutrients and put them into our bloodstream. When it comes to celiac disease, they flatten those villi, and that means nutrients like iron are struggling to get into your child's body. I look for symptoms of celiac disease, I look at family history, and I also look at the child's diet to see if it's rich in gluten products. Working in with a professional is important when it comes to nutrition, particularly when testing for celiac disease. I see a lot of undiagnosed celiac disease coming through my clinic. Often those have silent symptoms and been told that the generic antibody test has come back negative. In my opinion, this test is not good enough, particularly if they are showing signs of malabsorption. What I do see is the children that tick all those boxes, remove gluten from their diet, and use things to help heal their gut and bring those villi back into the small intestine. We see iron levels coming back to normal. And then we realize this is what was at the root cause. That being said, again, I highly recommend you work in with a professional if you are considering removing gluten from your child's diet. Okay, so we can see that a disease can wipe out the villi that suck up the iron and absorb it into the body. Well, what about things that block the absorption of iron going into our body? Did you know that calcium is a significantly larger molecule than iron? If your child has a diet that's really high in dairy, which I do see a lot of, thinking of cheese, yogurts, and a lot of cow's milk, this may actually be impacting on the absorption of iron into your child's body. And not only that, I do see a portion of children who come into my clinic that really struggle to digest dairy. And as a result, it leaves intestinal upset, which can then have further issues with absorption. They struggle to not only break down the lactose is the sugar, they also have issues breaking down casein protein. And this one is usually the culprit. If you suspect dairy may be the issue, and often it's the kids that absolutely love dairy, then definitely look at working in with a health practitioner if you are considering removing dairy from your child's diet. This way, you can make sure that their calcium levels are being met, as this is a key nutrient when it comes to your child's health. That being said, I am a huge advocate of eating all the foods. But if there are signs that some of these foods are actually doing more harm than good and damaging your child from the inside, they are definitely worth looking into. Let's talk about the critters. Yep, those intestinal pathogens. While many of them are permanent residents, there are certain bacteria in our gut that may block absorption of iron. If you have been going around in circles with your child's iron problems, perhaps your next step would be to do a full stool analysis to see what bacteria are living in your child's gut. And this can be done with a nutritional expert. They can see what is living in there, if there's too many of them living in there, or perhaps there's a few guys in there that shouldn't be in there. If you have found the information in this video so far helpful, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe. So we've covered the first two, now it's on to the other two. Number 3, increased demand. And this simply means that your child's body needs more iron. Why do they need more iron? Well, for a number of reasons. As you know, iron is a key component of our red blood cells. So when we bleed, we are actually losing iron. Now, I don't mean a cut in the leg or falling over and grazing yourself. Bleeding can happen in a number of ways, particularly if you have a daughter who has just hit menstruation age. In young teen girls, their hormones are all over the place, and some of them have quite a heavy flow. Someone who specializes in this area would be a go-to. If you have boys like me or younger kids that aren't at that age yet, internal blood loss can be another issue. And what I mean by that is in the intestines, bacterial infections, major food intolerances, Crohn's, or other underlying health conditions. If you are seeing blood loss in your child's stools, or there are complaints of discomfort in their gut, I would highly recommend taking a closer look here. When it comes to a higher demand for iron in the body, there are other ways other than blood loss. My kids are constantly growing, and when they grow, they demand more nutrients, including iron. The amount of growth spurts that my kids have in the school holidays is insane. They seem to be growing overnight. My eldest is almost taller than me. Either that or I'm shrinking. So an increased demand for iron, we see blood loss, we see growth spurts, and we also see children who are quite active, their demand for iron grows. Why? Because they're using up a lot more oxygen and their body is rapidly making red blood cells. And what's inside red blood cells? Iron. Because iron is what makes hemoglobin, the protein that sits in our red blood cells and carries oxygen around our body. Whether they're competing in the state championships for running, or whether they're running around the community collecting Pokemon. If your child is very active, they may need more iron. And the last one, genetics. I hear this one a lot, and I'm a big fan of epigenetics. I believe when it comes to our genes, we are in the driver's seat, and we can stop a lot of those genes that we see throughout our family from expressing. The reason a lot of parents ask me if it's genetics is because it often runs in their family. Their parents have iron deficiency, their grandparents have had iron deficiency, their siblings all have iron deficiency. Sounds like genetics. But when we take a closer look, it often comes down to the similar behaviors environments, and foods that we're eating in our family. And those things are what led them to iron deficiency anemia. That being said, there is research into a gene that is involved with the mutation of a protein that is required for iron regulation, which leads to a shortage of iron in our bloodstream. Iron refractory iron deficiency anemia is rare, but it does exist. If you are at your wit's end and you have checked everything possible that we have gone through, including other things which I may not have mentioned, then definitely this is something that you can look into, but it does take time to get this specific genetic testing done. You've learned some of the causes behind iron deficiency anemia, and if you've watched my previous video, you will understand some of the signs and symptoms associated with this. But what about some of the ways in the meantime that we can get our iron levels back in our children quickly while we're researching the root cause? In my next video in my iron deficiency series, find out which iron supplementation form I use in my clinic and why, as well as foods that I focus on that are rich in iron, and some of the other nutrients your child may be lacking that support the absorption of iron.